Did you hear the words that the narrator chose in there? Properties, engineered. Yeah, again, this points us back to a designer, to a creator, to an intelligent source that makes all of this happen. This doesn't happen by random chance over long periods of time. This takes an intelligent designer. And that intelligent designer is the God of the Bible. Alrighty, so that's snow, which is ice crystals. Now, let's make the distinction with sleet. Okay? Now, raindrops, as we saw compared to drizzle, are big. When these big raindrops, okay, fall through a layer of cold air, they freeze and they form ice pellets. Okay, not those lovely little crystals that we just saw in snowflake. They actually freeze into the form of pellets. And when they hit the ground, they pile up or melt, depending on what the temperature of the place that they land. Okay, so sleet is different from snow. Now, last lesson, we saw that there's this possibility of warm air rising and cold air sinking, and we get these up and down drafts. Well, guess what? If sleet gets caught in that cycle of being blown back up, then these ice pellets are going to make several trips through the cloud, and guess what? It's going to form bigger pellets, but it's still sleet, but we call this hail. Okay? And again, it starts out as a raindrop, but it gets blown back up into the cloud, right? And if it's blown up high enough, that raindrop's going to freeze, and then the ice crystal is going to pick up some more ice and get larger. And then if it does enough laps around through the cloud, you get what we think of as larger than normal ice crystals, right? And then eventually, this thing's going to get so big that upward gust of air isn't going to be enough to keep gravity from grabbing it and pulling it to the ground. And when it heads towards the ground, then we call it hail. And hail can get pretty big. Here's an example of a hailstone. And imagine a hailstone falling from the sky. Gains a lot of momentum. When I lived in Colorado, we would regularly get hailstorms. And there were times I was wondering if the roof was going to survive. And some places, things like car windshields don't survive, as shown here in this picture. So, hail, oversized recycled sleet. Then there's this stuff called freezing rain, which is different than sleet. Okay, the raindrops get really, really cold. But what's interesting with freezing rain is it does not freeze until it actually hits something solid. And as soon as they do, they freeze almost instantaneously. And what's interesting is freezing rain is actually more dangerous than sleet because have you ever seen a glazed donut? Well, that's kind of what happens. In fact, I distinctly remember one of these happening when I lived in Ohio. And one of the cars that was parked outside was a Jeep, and it was covered. The whole front end car, everything was covered. When the owner jumped in, started up the car, warmed up the car, and there was just enough warmth in the car that where the freezing rain had attached to the car melted just enough that the Jeep was able to back out, and it left this entire structure in the shape of the front of the car. Okay, I've given you some picture here. Okay, maybe you've seen this where you are, where you get this freezing rain, and it's just like a glazed donut, but frozen.
Happens in Panama all the time.
I'm sorry, what?
Happens in Panama all the time.
Oh, I'm sure it does.
My father-in-law is from Washington State, and the way they make the buildings, some of the parking lots are like this steep. And my father-in-law always says something like, "How's that going to work out during winter? There's no winter."
Exactly, exactly. Yeah. So kind of crazy, man. Um, so then I had a picture on the right here. I've got a picture of what it can do to power lines, and in northern climates where they expect this, they can design and build the power lines to accommodate that. But when you have snowpocalypse that hits Houston like once in 50 or 60 or 100 years, yeah, not so much. Now, I was doing some research and I came across this. It was an article uh, labeled "Ghost Apples," and this is a phenomenon that happens pretty regularly up in Michigan. So, what farmers have experienced repeatedly is that they'll get a freezing rain and the apple gets completely coated, but the temperatures are cold enough that the apple itself actually freezes, and then it actually turns into this mush and then oozes out through the bottom of this frozen shell, and then eventually all the apple mush and goo is gone, and what's left is this frozen outside shell, and they call them ghost apples, which just amazing. Alrighty, so that's freezing rain, and it's different from sleet. Okay, because sleet is the ice pellets that come down, and if it gets recycled a few times, it becomes hail, and which is different from ice, which is different from drizzle, which is different from rain. Okay, but then we got this stuff called dew. Now, George, I suspect you get this in Panama. Okay, and here's a good picture of one.
Heavy,
This is
heavy dew, heavy.
yeah.
Things get wet. Like it's very, very humid.
Yeah, yeah. And this is a shot a couple of years ago. My family, we went on vacation up to Arkansas, and I got up early one morning with my camera, and I went out, and this is what I saw. I saw these big these leaves are about the size of my palm, the palm of my hand, and there were these little droplets of dew that had collected on them, and that's dew. It's it just typically they form on plants, and collect into little droplets. And then if you have this dew that freezes, okay, then we've got frost. And typically that's autumn or winter, maybe early spring, okay, where the air that's near the surface of the earth gets colder, right, than the freezing point of water. And when that happens, when that water vapor sticks to to whatever, it freezes almost immediately on the surface, right? I was out riding my bike a year ago. It was in the winter about a year ago, a little over a year ago. And I came across this. Okay, this is a bolt that's about 2 inches in across on a metal bridge that I ride my bike across. And I just looked over and I saw this, and it just, oh man. So I stopped and got my camera out, took this picture. But this would be an example of frost, that forms and freezes. Yeah, yeah, pretty cool. Yeah, to me, all of this is just, God's creativity showing up in a bunch of different forms. So, now, what's interesting is there's actually two theories on how precipitation forms. One's called the Bergeron process, and one's called the collision coalescence process. But what's interesting is the Bergeron goes with cold clouds, and the collision coalescence goes along with warm clouds. Okay, so I put this picture together to help maybe make it a little easier to understand what's going on. So the Bergeron process, like I said, is how rain is formed in cold clouds. So I'm using blue for cold and yellow for warm. So we get the rain that forms in the cold clouds. And when I say cold, I mean temperatures that remain below freezing. So 32 degrees Fahrenheit, 0 degrees Celsius. Okay, and what that means is that the water vapor freezes, and it's mostly ice crystals. Okay, which is what I've shown here. got the ice crystals on the right-hand side under this cold cloud idea. And then as more water condenses out of the atmosphere, they get bigger and bigger and bigger, and eventually they get big enough that they fall. Okay, and as they fall, they pick up more ice, getting larger and heavier, and eventually, they get so big that they start breaking apart. Okay, and then they fall out of the cloud, and then they kind of come zipping down, and then they've got a couple choices here, right? They can hit, as they fall out of the cold cloud, they can hit warmer air, which is kind of the lower layer that I've got down here in this picture, warm air. And if they hit the warm air, guess what? They can melt and become rain. Or they can stay as ice crystals, which is what we call snow. Okay. Now, right-hand side of the top picture, we got warm clouds. With warm clouds, the theory for how precipitation forms is called the collision coalescence process. And since it's warm, the water droplets stay liquid. But they start colliding with one another. And smaller drops like drizzle then start collecting or colliding and coalescing, coming together with other droplets. And this goes on until the drops get big enough that they've got enough mass that gravity grabs them and they start falling. And again, like the Bergeron process, once they fall out of the cloud, they could hit warm air and stay as rain, or they could hit cold air and they either can become sleet, right, freeze into those ice pellets that we talked about, or get cold enough but not turn solid just yet until they hit the ground and then freeze as freezing rain. So again, in your brain, here's what I need. Bergeron, cold clouds. Collision coalescence, warm clouds. All right, so let's kind of put this all together in a single picture. We got rain, freezing rain, sleet, and snow. Okay. So what we got is warm air on the left, cold air on the right. And so temperature plays a big part on what form our precipitation is going to take.
Professor, a quick question. I know you probably mentioned it when I wasn't here, but with the hail, we've had hail here. How is that possible?
How is that possible? Okay. Well, let me back up to this picture. Okay. So remember, hail is just sleet that got recycled through the cloud and got bigger. So this picture over here, top left, cold cloud, it cycles through there several times. And so that ice pellet gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. Okay, as the wind blows it back up into the cloud, it collects some more water and ice on the thing. And so all that's happening way up in the atmosphere where it's cold. Okay, there are tables called standard atmosphere tables that up at elevation, it's like minus 57 degrees Fahrenheit, pretty standard. Okay, so that's cold enough to freeze things. So if you get the rain that forms and then freezes, and then you've got upward drafts, okay, especially with like thunderstorm clouds, cumulonimbus kind of clouds, that get those upward drafts going, it's easy for the hail to form. And then once it's big enough, okay, the time of flight, once it starts falling, it's going to stay as a solid mass of an ice pellet or hailstone until it gets to the ground. So again, the idea is that those hailstorms are forming way up in the atmosphere, way up high, and then falling to the earth. Now, I'm guessing typically your hail doesn't stick around very long there in Panama. Is that correct?
No, and it's very rare. Like if there's hail, it means it's really stormy. And the storms here, well, you've lived in the tropics. The storms here are nothing like the ones in the U.S. It's like thick droplets of rain, and it's like the whole heaven just broke open. Like I told every foreigner that comes here has the video of their first tropical rainstorm.
Okay. Now, what's interesting, let me ask you this, because I did have an opportunity to spend time in Hawaii, and I had to get recalibrated because on the island of Oahu, okay, almost every morning there is a rainstorm. But once the storm is over, it lasts about an hour or two, then it's done and it's sunny and clear for the rest of the day. But next morning it does it again. And there's as we saw with fronts and everything, on the ocean, a lot of different things come into play to create that. But I remember the first morning I was there and it happened. I was thinking, oh man, the day's ruined. And my friend who had lived there for about 4 years said, oh no, 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 no. This will be done in a couple hours and it'll be a beautiful day. And you've got the whole rest of the day to go exploring and do stuff. Is that similar? Something like that happened in Panama as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And it goes the other way around too. Horribly dark morning, super sunny, beautiful morning, like sun is shining super hard, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, parallel dimension, like black thunderstorm clouds, and then 5 o'clock in the afternoon, beautiful sun. It's an up and down. It's an emotional roller coaster of temperature because of the two oceans thing and the
Yeah.
tropics and the gigantic slab of concrete of the city next door. So I'm sure all those things play. Like I've driven where I see cars coming towards me that are soaking wet and everything's dry on this side. There's been storms where it's raining on that side of the house and it's not raining on that side of the house. But yeah,
Well,
crazy.
and where I live here in Houston, it is far enough south that we get. It's interesting because when we first moved here, where my house sits is about 10 miles from a shopping mall, and I distinctly remember one day I was sitting here, and I got a phone call from my wife who she called me and said she was at the mall, but it was raining so hard that she was just going to wait until it stopped, you know, so that she could go out to the car in the parking lot without getting soaking wet. And that was 10 miles between her and I. And I'm sitting here in sunshine. And she, like you said, it's dark, cloud, rain, stormy, so. And just the other day, uh, the here in Houston, the day was pretty and gorgeous. And my wife and I were, getting ready to go to bed. And all of a sudden, we hear this massive thunderstorm and rain coming down for about 20 minutes, and then it was done at night. So, it's just weather is amazing stuff. Of course, where Joseph lives in Arizona, it's just always sunny and clear and dry and boring, and nothing ever happens there.
I live in the mountains, brother. It's not like that at all.
Oh yeah, yeah. You're just making up stories because you want to play that. Yeah, you me. Now tell me some of the adventures you've had with weather there, Joseph.
Well, put it this way. We had a our days were in the 60s, and that Friday we were 6 inches of snow. The next day, 12 inches of snow. The next day, 2 feet of snow. And then the day after that, bright and sunny and sunshine.
Yeah, and then all the snow melts and it's like, whoa.
Yeah, the weather can get pretty crazy up here sometimes just because of the area that we're at, and the
Yeah.
weather's all thrown up by the mountains. And yeah,
Yep. Yeah. Okay. All right. Cool. How fun is that? All righty. Yeah. It's funny. I have lived in so many different places, and what I've observed is every place that I've lived, people say, well, if you don't like the weather, wait 5 minutes, it'll change. And that seems to be true everywhere that I've lived. When I was a cadet at the Air Force Academy, we had a scenario where 21 weekends in a row, it was sunny and gorgeous all day long. And then Friday morning, the scout clouds would come over the mountains, and then by the afternoon, the storm clouds would come in and either rain or snow. And so 21 weekends in a row, they closed the sign out log, so we didn't get to go out for the weekend. Just crazy.